All right. Hello. This is Module 5 and Lesson 1, which is weathering. So just to review, acids, we talk about chemical weathering, and chemical weathering is breaking down the chemical bonds of something. And so that's usually done with an acid. And so an acid is something that has hydrogen ions. If we're thinking about the pH scale, acid is something that is 0 to 6 on the pH scale. All right, so looking at different types of weathering. Weathering is just simply breaking down rock. We're usually talking about rock in this case, but breaking down rock into smaller pieces or into something different. So there's two types. There's mechanical and chemical. And so mechanical weathering is when you just break it down into smaller pieces. So if you take a large rock and you break it into a couple chunks, that's mechanical weathering. The rock didn't change at all, it just changed shape. Whereas chemical weathering, it's actually breaking down and dissolving the rock. So you can see the picture on the left, the rock simply broke in half. Whereas the picture on the right below my video, you can see that it's dissolving. So these little pock marks, very typical near the ocean where you have some dissolving occurring. So that would be chemical weathering. All right, and then so if we think about mechanical weathering, I said that it's broken in half or broken down into smaller pieces. There's a couple different ways with weathering. So we talked with erosion. We talked about erosion with wind, waves, water, things like that. So that would be all mechanical, breaking it down into smaller pieces. But temperature, the way this plays a part is water gets into cracks, and if you've ever left anything in the freezer, you know that water expands when it freezes. And so when it expands, it's pretty strong and it pushes the rock and causes it to break. So you can see that in this picture here, the water gets in, seeps into the cracks, freezes, expands, and now you're left with a chunk of rock that is broken in half. And that would be definitely mechanical. It didn't dissolve or do anything like that. All right. And then you can see the process here. So water seeps into the cracks, the picture on the left. It freezes, and then now you've got a bigger crack. That's called frost wedging. So the water wedged in between the crack and wedged the rock apart. So frost wedging. And then we got pressure. So plants do a good job of this. If you've ever looked at plants near sidewalks, like in the picture on the right, or just plants in general with their roots, they are extremely strong as far as breaking things down. So they will lift sidewalks, they will break rock apart, they'll wedge their roots within the rocks. So that would also cause the rock to weather and break apart. All right, so sometimes we get bedrock being exposed. So think of like Half Dome in Yosemite, for example. So rock is broken down because it's exposed, and then the outer layers are stripped away. So it kind of breaks off in big sheets. And you can see that with this picture. So I'll explain the bottom right picture in a minute. But this is Half Dome. So Half Dome is a pretty cool hike. When I hiked up Half Dome, you did not need a permit. But nowadays, because there's so many people that want to do it, you do need a permit to hike up, and you just apply for it and hope you get picked in the lottery. So this is the last part of it in Yellowstone. Yosemite National Park. You can see the people climbing up this little ladder here. So that's the very last portion. It is extremely dangerous and kind of scary. But then you get up to the top, and this is actually quite large, and you can get out on these rocks. But you can see the reason that I put this picture is that you can see exfoliation. So you can see the sheeting of the rocks breaking off. The reason I put this picture on there is because this is let's see, it's myself and my husband, but I was 21 in the picture, and he was 23, and he proposed to me on the top of Half Dome. So it was kind of cool. So anyways, that's why I included that picture. So that is a version of me that's not too much older than you guys are right now. All right. So chemical weathering. If we look at chemical weathering, that is breaking it down into smaller and smaller pieces. I'm sorry, it's breaking it down by dissolving. Sorry. So dissolving is breaking the chemical bond. So it's called chemical weathering because the rock is no longer the same. The rock is dissolving, and some of the minerals are washed away by the water. And so that would be chemical. So water does this by dissolving. It's a really good solvent. And things that are water soluble will dissolve in water. So, for example, salt. Salt will dissolve in water. So, if anything contains salt, like halite, for example, is a naturally occurring mineral, and that would dissolve. Calcite would dissolve in water. Limestone dissolves, especially in acidic water. So the oceans are slightly acidic. They're getting more and more acidic as more and more CO2 is in the atmosphere. But that would be how water can affect it. So it basically just works as a really good solvent. All right, and then oxygen. Oxygen breaks down the rock by causing it to oxidize. So that's when you have iron combining, you've got iron in the rock and it combines with oxygen, and it forms red, the color red, which is rust. So you can see in these pictures, you can see the reddish color rock, and we have quite a bit of that around here. And that would be because we have a lot of iron in our rock. So I did mention a while back about Mars. So thinking about Mars, Mars is known as the red planet. It has a lot of iron. And so that iron at some point must have oxidized. So that's kind of interesting information because you need oxygen to oxidize rock. And so at some point, Mars did have oxygen, a lot more than it does so now. All right, so carbon dioxide, let me move my little video. But carbon dioxide is when you have that CO2 basically. So you could have that in the atmosphere, you could have that dissolved in the water, but it makes the water more acidic. And we can't really feel this. Like if we were to feel acid rain, for example, we can't tell that it's acid rain. It would feel just the same as water. Soda is actually way more acidic than acid rain, and when you pour soda on your arm or your hand, you can't feel that. It just feels wet. So but things can be slightly acidic, and that will dissolve things like limestone, calcite, things that contain those minerals. So you can see in this cave, this water has dissolved this cave. That's one of the reasons that we have Shasta Caverns. So Shasta Caverns is formed because we have this layer of limestone, and then the water sinks down in through the rocks, and it dissolves that limestone layer, which was laid down when this area was under the ocean. And so that area has dissolved. The reason that the top is not exposed is because the top is igneous rock. So we've got, and kind of a combination of metamorphic too, but we've got different types of rock on the top that are more resistant to weathering, and then we've got the limestone kind of sandwiched in between, and that weathers, especially with water. So then we have a cave forming on the inside. All right, and then this is basically the same thing I was talking about. It can also form sinkholes too. So sinkholes are a really good example of this type of weathering as well, and that's just basically a hole in the ground.
Welcome to the natural passages to the most spectacular wonders below the Earth's surface, caves. Right now you're looking at the most common type of caves found in the world, limestone caves. Perhaps what makes these underground rooms so fascinating are the formations which decorate the cave's ceilings and floors. As falling rain passes through the soil layers, carbon dioxide and other minerals from decaying matters are trapped within the solution. Upon reaching the cave, the water droplets fall, and the carbon dioxide is released, leaving behind tiny calcite crystals. These mineral deposits are what form all of the cave decorations. Let's take a closer look at some common cave formations. Over here, we have the dripstones. Soda straws are thin-walled, hollow formations that resemble drinking straws. As water drips slowly from the roof of the cave, it deposits a microscopic ring of calcite crystal. Stalactites hang from the cave roof. Nearly all stalactites start their life as a straw. When the straw becomes blocked with calcite or impurities, the stalactite starts to develop and thicken over the years, from the solution which runs down its outer surface. Conversely, stalagmites grow upwards from the cave floor due to the accumulation of material deposited from ceiling drippings. Stalactites and stalagmites can eventually join from floor to ceiling to become columns or pillars. However, the process may take up to 100,000 years. Not all water that reaches the roof of the cave forms droplets. Sometimes it trickles down a rock face, depositing a narrow strip of calcite that eventually results in a thin sheet growing at an angle from the wall. This formation is called a shoal. Last but not least, we have flowstones. These formations occur when flowing water leaves a film of calcite. They cover the original rock or mud floor, and the lower portions hang free, making a fringe or shawl of stalactites. These beautiful formations are very delicate and can be easily damaged, which is why it is vital to preserve the pristine beauty of these natural environments.
All right, so you probably recognize some of the different things, different formations that you saw in the video at Shasta Caverns if you guys have ever been there. There's quite a few of those same formations. All right, so more about chemical weathering. So I mentioned acid rain. So acid rain is formed because we are well, it can be formed from forest fires, but mostly it's formed and becomes a problem with burning fossil fuels. So rain is slightly acidic normally, but with burning of fossil fuels, we release sulfur dioxide and nitrous oxides into the atmosphere. And that mixes with the atmospheric gases, mixes with the water vapor, and then eventually rains down. And what it does is it forms this more acidic acid rain, which, like I said, doesn't affect us. We can't tell. But things that rely on it, like amphibians, fish, plants, they really can't survive in stuff that is like soda. Think about giving your fish or your plants soda to drink. That's not going to work out very good. So that would be the effects of acid rain. So it causes a weakening of the plants. The plants aren't fried; they're not burned right away, but they can absorb the nitrogen and things out of the soil as well, and so they slowly die. They might turn yellow. Animals might not develop correctly, like amphibians. Their eggs might dissolve before they can actually survive and hatch. So that's kind of how acid rain can affect things, and that's also can affect the land. So it can cause dissolving, excess dissolving of limestone and things like that.
What is acid rain? Acid rain is any form of precipitation with high levels of nitric and sulfuric acids. It can occur in the form of snow, fog, and even dry materials that settle to Earth. Most acid rain is caused by human activities. When people burn fossil fuels, sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxides are released into the atmosphere. These gases react with water, oxygen, and other substances to form sulfuric and nitric acid. Winds may spread these acidic solutions over hundreds of miles. After it falls to Earth, acid rain enters water systems as runoff and sinks into the ground. This can make water toxic to crayfish, clams, fish, and other aquatic animals. The rest of the food chain, including non-aquatic species such as birds, is often affected as well. Acid rain also harms forests by damaging trees' leaves, robbing the soil of essential nutrients, and making it hard for trees to take up water. By designing cleaner power plants and using fewer fossil fuels, we can reduce the number of pollutants that create acid rain.
All right, so we saw in the video that there were some devastating things that happen with acid rain, and we can see in this forest here, definitely it is affected by acid rain. Other things that are affected, we've got gravestones, for example. If you guys have ever been to a cemetery, really old one, and a lot of the gravestones are made out of marble. Well, marble is a metamorphic version of limestone, and it will actually dissolve in acid rain. So a lot of times you go to read those headstones and you can't read them anymore. They've gotten so weathered that that the writing is almost gone. And so that would be another example of chemical weathering. All right, so a little bit about climate. weathering, as far as the climate goes, if it's warmer, then weathering occurs faster than if it's colder. So we have weathering occurring that could be physical or chemical weathering, but generally, as the temperature goes up, weathering occurs faster. That's generally the rules there. So if we look at the rock type, of course, that's going to make a difference. If it's a weak rock versus a strong rock, it's going to be affected faster or slower. Also surface area. So surface area is the area that's exposed to the surface. So here we've got a lot of, not very much surface area. So this is a large cube, not as much surface area. So it's going to break down slower because the only part that's going to break down is going to be the part that's exposed. So you've got a whole lot of interior of this cube that is not exposed. Notice what happens as the rock gets smaller and smaller, though, there's more and more surface area. So this has way more surface area, even though it's the same volume. And that's because all these little cubes, they all have surface exposed on every side. So even though it's the same volume, its surface area is a lot more because it's broken down. And so it's kind of it goes faster and faster. So if you start with this surface area, breaking down is very slow, but as it gets smaller and smaller, the rate of weathering goes up. And that's just because there's more surface area. And you can see the surface area here equals 600 cubic centimeters. This is 6,000 cubic centimeters, even though the volume is the same. And that's just because there's more area exposed to weathering. All right, and then topography has a big plays a big factor in this. So you can see this is kind of cool. This is on the right is called Devil's Postpile. It's down south, I think a little bit south of Yosemite, actually like towards Mammoth. But it's pretty cool. It's these hexagonal pillars, and it's weathering in this way because of the way it formed. It's an igneous intrusion, so magma seeped up through and cooled in like these column type formations, and so then it's breaking apart and weathering in that same way. And then this is another example of this just unique weathering, and this has to do with the ocean and what type of rock this is made out of, which is mostly limestone here. And that's it. So I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next time.